There's a lot of tech.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, we've begun recording. Thank you for joining us for Noontime Knowledge. Our regular host, Mr. Andy Aquino, is on a well-deserved vacation today, so I'm taking over as co-host. If you have any questions, there'll be time at the end for questions and answers. We are recording this, and I am very happy to present Town of Wheatfield historian Justin Higner and NCCC alum. He is going to talk about the town of Wheatfield. So I am going to share his PowerPoint. Yes.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all very much for having me. It's been a while since I've been here, but and especially as the first time I presented here, in this way. So it's really very special to be on campus again. And although I've come back and forth over the years, I'm still responsible for the annual Giving Tree charity. So this is 21 years of doing that this year, actually, of bringing it out and setting it up and getting it all ready for kids to be able to have a Christmas each year who might otherwise not be able to. So that's the kind of thing I still maintain. The funny thing is I was just over in the cafeteria there in the food commons, in the new food commons place, and I see one of the people that was working here at the time I was coming here. She's been here a long while, and I see her turned around and I'm looking at her back and I see the different logos there and I see the student senate seal and I'm like, I made that. So that's just, it's really gratifying to still see it, little bits and pieces of yourself on campus if you can find it. And I've just been around the perimeter of the campus actually, as I was doing other things, actually to look out for the remains of the farms and houses that used to be on this lot before the campus was actually built. And there's actually a few little things still remains, but that I'll save for another time. So this is history at home, using retired tax assessment cards and picture donations. This is a research methodology that I have used since I became a historian and discovered these, that allows me to be able to really dig into the history of the town. And in many ways, besides just numbers and tax data and things like that, it's kind of boring stuff. Now, if you live in certain places, of course, if you live at that address, that data is, I think, still essential because it helps to show you the value of your lot going further back on all that. But what we're really interested in is the history in these cards, actually. So next.
There we go.
So what is an assessment card? Because they still have physical cards today. It's a data sheet composing of property measurements and building composition in relation to its neighbors in order to calculate a taxable value. School districts often use these too to base their taxes off of. So do libraries and other services. Now, these came with pictures to help aid in identification and evaluation. For some businesses, this normally included equipment assets. All of that counted essentially, and you'll see one of these lists later on in the show. They were created, initially created in the 1950s via a grant allocated to each town in New York State, for example. Next. They were created by going from house to house in person. They were periodically updated according to changes made to each lot, and they were maintained between 1957 and 1980. That is to say, the pictures you will see in this presentation. By town assessor at the time, Willis Retzlaff, who was born in 1927 and passed away in 2005 in his 1956 Buick Special with added staff. And this grant helped pay for the extra staff because the town of Wheatfield is very, didn't have the amount of staff that they have today. So this allowed for him to hire extra people. And you'll see his card, later on. A second series of cards and pics were taken between 1980, or actually 1977 probably, and 1995. By 1995, they were more like Polaroids. So we were assessed as a town in 1957, about 1977, 78, and again in 1995. We were actually overdue for a reassessment of the town, but I'll leave that for a whole other discussion. And it's interesting actually how evaluations equate. And so I think a lot of people actually want this to happen. Anyways, the cards were similar. Were made in a similar process. And they're made now through internet searches and other sources, making the previous cards essentially obsolete to taxation purposes, except to add to a lot's overall record, as I previously stated. Current assessment cards are maintained but contain no pictures. They don't need to. They just go onto Google to see what you have, or from the air. Only raw data. With these ones, however, they're not just data points and pictures, but actually the stories of lives lived, family names recorded, and memories made in connection with those. Next. So this is Willis Retzlaff, the town assessor at the time, doing that classic what, click, kind of, it was just like, Willis, look up, what, click, and that's how he, it's that face. But yeah, he was a very hardworking man, really loved and liked by everybody, belonging to the Retzlaff family, who were farmers and did other vocations in Wheatfield and elsewhere, still active farmers today. Next. Now, this is one of his stationery items right here. Actually, this is a listing that you see of the different people that worked under him, essentially. The town of Wheatfield Assessors Office. Now, the chairman of the office was Herman Carl Beisch, and you had Hugh Parkhill and Frank Egan working in that office. And Willis was the actual assessor, he's kind of the guy in charge, but Herman was the chairman. Next up. So there were 4,000 plus cards in the 1950s, and they were kept in a large catalog and bound into place with metal sticks and Rolodex style, and arranged likely by the lot's SBL numbers. The SBL number is the number that's under your address. It's the foundational number under everything. And SBL stands for section, block, and lot on a regional plan. And it breaks down from there, but we won't go into that mud right now. Once they were retired by 1980, because they were all filled out, they expired. So about 1977, 1980, they started to become obsolete, and they were bound up in rubber bands and stored in 4 large boxes. They were rediscovered in 2017, pulled apart, scanned, repaired, and arranged by street and address. They were owned by the town in trust for the residents and guests to the historian's office for the sake of search and survey, as well as historical inquiries. Our current town assessor actually has a copy of all these too. So if nothing else, you can always pop that in and look these things up as well. Collectively, they lay a foundation for a comprehensive historical record, as well as informing property owners of the nature of their lot. That is to say, if I'm buying a lot that was a farm in particular, or a business, or a garage of some sort, and I want to dig in somewhere, I want to install something new. Besides just a few anecdotal things or stories of, oh, I think there was a building there, I think there was something over there. This will tell you exactly what was there. This will show you where garages were, where foundations were, where tanks were underground, so that as you're about to dig, you can look at these older assessments and figure, okay, this change was made, and I can now kind of find out where that was and then solve the problem. Next. So the Wheatfield History Facebook group page comments add to the history further, creating 3 levels in all of a home, a business, or a lot's biography for researchers. They can be paired with other sources such as aerial pictures and data supplied from other local historians and family history genealogists, and also home genealogists, if you will. There are people that go around and actually have a service of creating a genealogical book, basically, project for your home. Few communities maintain their old assessment records. Thankfully, we did, as history begins at home. Well, I think that's the new philosophy for these things. Next. Okay, so this is a couple pictures of what I was dealing with, and they are all sorted in this way. The newer pictures are up in there, basically in order of the beginning of the SBL numbers. So 147, 162, 163, the rest of it. And then we have the actual cards themselves, which are no longer bound in those complicated Rolodex style things. Now they're sorted out in the bins that you see, and each of these pink tabs are attached to any building that's built from about 1930 and before, 1920 or before, really. And so if a structure is going to be basically 100 years old coming up, that's kind of the cutoff right there. Or if a property has an interesting history to it in the first place, something special happened there, or it was the only one in the town and has some other thing that happened, it gets a pink tab as well. In this world, a pink slip is a good thing. So, next. And this is what I had to deal with regards to the pictures. I found them just like this. Just wrapped up, pulled out the cards and thrown in the thing and forgotten. But you know, I pulled those apart too and had to sort them up, SBL number, and scan them all 4 by 4 by 4 by 4. And so that becomes a record then. Next. Now, this is a typical assessment card. And I'm not going to point out every last little thing about it. There's a lot of data points here. But here is the famous Sawyer Creek Inn or Sawyer Creek restaurant right there. This picture, you'll see another one in a bit, a little bigger. This is the property as it looked by around 1957-58. And so you got a visual representation. You got the pink tab that I put on for the notation as a historic building. It goes back to 1885. And you can see, well, what kind, what use is it? Is it, while people were living upstairs too, the owner, I think, Mr. Weiland. This was under Frederick Weiland and his wife, Anna, and they lived upstairs. So this was a residence. It was also public service, and then notated restaurant. This is a special use as a restaurant. The floors, are they joisted, milled? Are they steel beams? Is it concrete, joisted or joisted? The flooring, is it softwood, hardwood, tile, cement, linoleum? It's softwood. And then you basically break it down from there. The main thing I usually look at is the year. And sometimes they'll just say old, which doesn't tell you much. So you're going to have to look at the architectural styles. You're going to have to look at other clues that we local historians have to be able to go over and even interview people, whatever it takes to kind of break it down. The foundation is very important too. However, the foundation is laid tells a lot as well. So we can kind of figure it out, but this just helps if someone at the time can remember at least when it was built. And there are other details like this in calculations and the final calculated value of the lot, which at that time was $17,144 as a whole, as a lot. The building's valued at $9,571.
What year was this?
So this is 1957 or 58. Now, these would be updated. So this number might be actually reflecting about 1977 numbers, actually, as opposed to 50s, because you can kind of tell it's been erased a little bit. So it would have fluctuated over time. And they almost always wrote in pencil. The only time they wrote in pen is if the structure was demolished and it just simply crossed it out. And that was it. Next up. This is the back of it, actually, the back of the same one. And you can see the different names of the people who own the property. That is to say, the grantor and the grantee. Sometimes those are one and the same. Sometimes they're totally different people. You might own the building, but you lease it out to somebody else, or you grant it to somebody else. They're the ones that take care of it, or to that effect. Yeah, so next. And now here's a blow-up picture for the benefit of especially for our audiences at home. And they can see how this is laid out. Note the cars here, a mixture of the late 40s and early 50s makes. There's a Buick right there. I know people who know their cars, and when I have these pictures, I'd love to see the cars and go for it. Look at, of course, note the gas installation here. Almost any place like this had gas, and even full service. These are all supplemental income. These are small businesses. These weren't big chains. Each of these stood on their own, and they had their own individual contracts for certain groups like Texaco and so forth for their supplies. Note also Niagara Falls Boulevard. It's still, of course, right next to it, and it's being resurfaced. We can even see there's a hole in the ground right here. No safety cones around, of course. Safety was a funnier word back then. But anyways, here's a whole hole right there that they're working on as they're redoing the boulevard. It would be expanded later to 4 lanes, and that's in this direction over here. So that's why it looks so narrow. Now, people used to enter into the side, or they went right into the front. Nowadays, this whole thing is very much changed. You got a whole balcony out here. It's been extended out. and other changes made to it. But the whole thing pretty much looks the same as it did back then. And if you go there today behind the bar, this picture is hanging up behind the bar. Because I donated whatever I had to him, and he graciously reprinted a lot of those. Next up. Now here's an old-fashioned thing that we see on Transit Road now. It's the last one we've got, the Boulevard DriveIn. But this is our equivalent, the Boulevard DriveIn here, not the Transit. And this is a view of the sign of it from the road, the entranceway. And if you want to go to the next one. Now the Boulevard DriveIn, I should mention, was on the corner of Cy Road and Niagara Falls Boulevard, by the way. It's where People Inc. would be later on. Now, this is a Amoco station right here. And this is one of our garages in the town. On this one, you can see the SBL number right here. In 1977, 78, when they did the next round of surveys, at this point, they just simply had the camera in the car, as opposed to the 1950s, the guy or a staff member walked around in person, took a picture. This is fixed in the car. So they just stayed in the car, they took a picture, and they just changed the numbers as they went along the way. This garage, though, is still on Niagara Falls Boulevard. Jackie Quintero Lakeman said, I grew up on Cy Road. I can remember a whole gang of us walking down to the gas station in the late 60s, early 70s. No parents. I was young as 4 or 5. We bought penny candy and chocolate bars. Marathon bars were a favorite, and city and candy cigarettes. We also bought real cigarettes for our parents. The older kids looked after the younger ones. Of course, the drive-in was the place to go. Parents paid for a carload, and we played on the merry-go-round and swing at the front. So this is a memory about the drive-in that was right near the garage. Next up. Now this is a fun picture right here, taken in 58. This is Kroll's Tavern, probably the most famous watering hole in the whole town and most likely the oldest. This part of it right here being in the German Fachwerk style in a sense. It was the methodology of basically saving on lumber and using clay and straw and other smaller wood members in between large frames to basically build a structure. Now, this was added on to in later years to become a full-blown tavern and a little restaurant. This is a house attached to it where the Kroll, part of the Kroll family lived. This was the first St. Johnsburg Fire Hall right there with its sort of alarm or bell up on top there. This is where Alder Creek Music would eventually go, music store. The next building over is the second Wheatfield Town Hall. Now we'll see close-ups of a couple of these later on, but the second town hall built in 1902 and closed in 1973 when the whole administration moved over to Church Road. You can see the rest of Ward Road going south and further down that way. You could see a lot of the classic cars of the time period, the trucks. Look at the supply trucks here, probably supplying any kind of libations and other goods naturally. And here is the northern part of Ward Road, and you see the railing there and so forth. You could see so much in this picture. I mean, this is a great assembly of a lot of the buildings that people remember. Kroll's Tavern, by the way, rested right on the boulevard. It was literally on the corner. It was built so far back in the 1850s, basically, originally, that the roads had extended right up against it. It sat right where the lawn and the sign for the 7-Eleven is now. So actually, Wilson Farms would be built further back. Next. This is the Schmidt House. Over here on Niagara Road in the village of Burkholz, and right down the way from St. James Church. Now, this place dated back to around 1850, about that period, 1855 or so, and was lived in for a long time. It actually used to be a shop as well as a residence. This window, you can tell, is a little bigger than the other ones, and that's because their wares were shown off in this section of the house. My colleague John Schroeder, when we talk about Burkholz related things, I defer to my fellow board members at the Historical Society of North German Settlements of Western New York, which have their museum at 2549 Niagara Road. They're open every Sunday 2 to 4 seasonally. And they have much more to say about some of these places, but that's basically what this was. Now, this was in line for preservation actually by the 70s or so, but unfortunately there was too much rot and they had to tear it down. But this is a really great picture of what that place used to look like when it was still in pretty good condition. Next. Now this right here was St. Jacobus School. This was built in 1906, and during World War I, there was a bit of an anti-German sentiment, of course, because of the First World War. So it became St. James School, along with the church and so forth. Now, this is much more known today as Dubois Funeral Home. And it's been beautifully maintained and everything by the current owners there. And you can tell some work is being done on the side here of the building at the time. Again, this is 1957, 58. There was a either a parsonage or another teacherage house right here. That's at where the parking lot is for that funeral home today. So this is gone. But the building that you see today is pretty much still the same, except for the removal of the original bell that was up there. Don't know what happened to the bell. I got to ask about that. Next up. Now, this should be familiar to anybody who's visited the Das Haus Museum campus. This is our house. This is Das Haus, and it is as you see it from 1958 again or so. And when it was a rental property, actually, yet it would be a rental property until about the mid 60s. There are videos on my YouTube channel under my name of interviews we had with Larry Walsh when he and his little sister were the last people to actually live in this house. This cabin, the log cabin that's underneath, was built in a certain style and was one of 20 or so, 25 cabins that were salvaged from the Lockport, New York Flight of 5 Erie Canal Reconstruction Project. These were supposed to be homes for the temporary homes for the workers that were going to be doing that work, but there was a labor dispute as discovered by by our colleague Chris Bacon over there in Lockport, and it was discovered that these cabins were likely the unused products of that, essentially, so we're not used. So Washington Hunt donated these to the 500 plus initial Uckermark German immigrants when they got up here. Long story about that. But basically they utilized these cabins, and then eventually they built their own homes, and the village expanded to be what it is today. There are 2 to 3 of these still left. Ours is the only one that you can actually visit, and you can actually get a good idea as to what life is like from like the 1840s in our town in general on, really, because a lot of the same environment was there. Note the hand pump right there on the side, which we kind of still have, and the door and so forth as it was. Okay, next.
But now there's a barn too.
Yes, we have an Ein house, which is a house barn combination. The bones of that are all original. They were hewn in the around 1845, 46, and that's when it was built. It was originally on the Hasley Farm, and we'll see that in a moment. Now, this is off of Lockport Road here. This is a Mennonite Lockport stone house. There are several of these up and down Lockport Road in particular. The last one further into the city of Niagara Falls and the town of Niagara. Now, this would have been made out of leftover stone from the Erie Canal project, essentially, and were built by the Mennonites who settled into this area in the late 1820s, early 1830s, and they had whole farms and so forth, especially in the Walmore area of the town, or the northwest portion of the community. Actually, the whole northern end of the town. It was essentially Mennonite country. When our German ancestors came here, though, again from that have to do with the Das Haus Museum, they made deals with the Mennonites, and the Mennonites actually found better prospects up in Canada and further west anyway. So they sold out to a part of the German immigration group, and that became the village of Walmau, or Walmore as we call it now, know it now. And a few of these buildings are still up today. Next up. Now this is an awesome place right here. This is another famous watering hole called the Walmore Inn. It dates back to 1829, 1839, that range there. This whole, the core of it anyways, dates that far back, was added on to, and this is how it looked like by 58 again. Note again the cars, and if the people at home can, I can't hear you, but I'm hoping you guys are shouting out a few numbers, because Again, this is the age of the automobile, this is really when more people were owning them. People had greater access to them. Highways and roads are getting better throughout the country. And so you start to see even more of these things further out into places like Wheatfield, whereas before they were kind of rare. You can see a truck in here too. I mean, everybody was here. So the Walmart Inn has a very long history. They're still open today, as far as I know too. Next. Now this is at the intersection of Lockport Road and Walmart Road, the first section of Walmart Road, going up past the Bel Aerospace plant area in Carborundum, straight up north at the T. And you will notice here all the different pieces and parts making up your classic gas station, your classic service station. I mean, the winged horse, logos around here on these different installations there, the gas installations. You see Texaco with the star there. You've got the lattice work over part of it for, just very stylized. The garage and the waiting area right in here. I think there's a telephone pay booth near here. All of them have that kind of thing. There were no cell phones then, of course. People didn't even have a lot of phones in their homes yet. 911 wasn't even an option then. We didn't even have that. We didn't have a full sewer yet, by the way, back then. It wasn't until 1980s that would change. So everything was very different back then. So were the service stations. Note the cars in the pictures. Note also in the background, way in here, is St. Peter's Church over in the Walmart neighborhood. We can see it from behind right there. You see the spire and so forth. That building is still around today. And note also the white lines on the telephone pole here. I would imagine that would help to make sure that people did knock out the line in case they just swung it off the road. A place like this would have been very, very busy. So you wanted to make sure to mark everything out. Next. Now this was Dubois right here. This became later on the Country Cafe, and it was located on Niagara Falls Boulevard and Ward Road, again, the other intersection. It's still there today, although it won't be for much longer. They're going to be eventually taking that down to rework Niagara Falls Boulevard again, but it was a delicatessen, general store, and restaurant in there. There's a couple of memories attached to this too. Debbie Schmill says, my memories are walking or riding our bikes down with $1 and getting Boston beans, lemon heads, Charleston chews, Lady Tangy, etc. for 10 cents each from Chet's. That's what this place was also called at one time. I also remember the day I rode my bike to Nash Road School with my clarinet and got caught in a rainstorm on my way back home. And the owners took me into the store and helped dry me off and let me call my grandfather to come pick me up and my bike in his van. I was only 10 years old. That's the neighborhoods like that, where Patricia Deacon says, our family always stopped in there on our way home from church to buy a loaf of Wonder Bread. While mom ran in, us kids would play I Spy with the colorful advertisements in the Dubois windows. Mom would come out with a little brown bag with pretzel sticks for being good in church. They were coming back from the service. Next up. Okay, now this picture is presented not necessarily for the great farm structures in the background. I forget exactly what road this is, but you can see the assessor's car right here. This is a great close-up of his car. This is a 56 Buick Special, and you can tell again that the stylized proportions of a different time. And so he took that car all over the place, and by virtue of him doing this job as town assessor, it's probably the most photographed car in the history of our town. Not that anyone's trying to find the most photographed fill in the blank, but that definitely stands out. Next up. Now here's a good example of a couple of pictures that showed two things, the farmhouse and the farmstead. So when they visited a farm, they would take at least 2 pictures and make sure everything got accounted for. This is off of Lockport Road, across the way from the SPCA, by the rail bridge kind of. It's right in that area. And at least the house and a part of this is still standing today. Next up. Now this is another farmstead that was captured, this time in just one big picture. And this picture was actually kind of special on the Facebook feed because there was a man who, and they private messaged me, and I really appreciate those. He basically says, and I can tell that with the way he was typing, he says, I need to know if you have our old farm in your collection. I would be most grateful. So I dug around and came up with this picture, and I could tell his excitement as he goes, yes, yes, thank you very much. But he really was actually very grateful because he had not seen a picture of this in many years, and he had said we don't have really anything about it. There's a whole housing development there now, so you can't see it anymore. But he informed me that the earliest part of the house is basically in this area, and that they added on in the 1890s. So he said, in the picture you have otherwise of it, don't be fooled by that. There's actually more to it off the back that was even older, dating back to maybe the 1850s, 60s or so. So he informed me, I informed him, and that's how that kind of thing works. Next up. Now, this one here is of the Hasley Farm. Most of these buildings are still around today. This barn is still there. This is gone. I think the rest of the house is in that direction. Here's Mr. Retzlaff's Buick in the picture again. And this is in winter, which is what I love because the foliage is down and you can see through to everything. This building here is what we're really looking at here. This building is still around today, only it's not right there. It's at the Das House Museum lot. And the rest of it was stripped away and it was taken down and relocated there several years ago. Now, originally, this would not have had all this planking across the sides of it. That was enclosed later on. Originally would have been more open. You could see the framework, or at least most of it. And you could have seen the straw and the clay and the other members packed in between the big square wooden frames. And of course, that was changed later on to preserve it. You know, as they could afford it, you know, they bought more materials to really enclose it from the elements. And that's why buildings like that, when they do survive anywhere, that's why you have to, if you can sheathe it better, it survives. And we have it to this day. It's a critical component of our museum campus today. Next up. Now, this picture is interesting. Of course, it's your typical mid-century style ranch home. You can tell that there's still installing things. There's new shrubs in the ground. The trailer for whatever that's working on it. I think it says plumbing, like Weston Plumbing, something like that on there. But the house and all of that is not what's the important part about this picture. What is this flagpole. Note that it is at half staff. The picture was taken in 1968. They kept taking pictures and doing these things, you know, as they were built essentially. And they kept on assessing anyways. In 1968, though, as you can figure, it was a very, very tough year for the United States, right? All kinds of stuff was going on, anti-Vietnam War protests, racial violence, and the civil rights era, and so forth. All of which was coming, the American Indian movement and gay rights and so forth. A lot was going on. Now, this is at half staff for maybe one of a number of reasons. So there could have been a serviceman attached to this address that could have been killed in action, and this is a personal sign of mourning. It may be that Robert F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr. had just been killed, and who knows what their feelings were about that, so they reflected their grief. But somehow someone made that personal gesture. And as the assessor came by, he happened to take a picture at that moment, and that's what we have forever. Next. This is a very old place right here, also in the Walmart neighborhood, dating back to the 1850s or so, and then preserved beautifully. It's just got this baby blue paintwork on it. And if you go by, today is a large barn kind of thing off to the side, and you can still see it in this day and age. I got to speak to the owner of that place. I think I was invited to speak with him, and I will soon. Again, note the SBL number right in front here as he was recording it. Next. Now, a lot of these cards have more than one picture attached to it. Sometimes both pictures or three might be layered over each other as the law changed. Different houses went from being just a small thing to a bigger thing, and as changes were made, they needed proof, right, to be fair about the taxable value, so they would take another picture. Here is two pictures of the same place. Here we have it in 57, 58 of a very small house. I think this is off of either Town Line Road or Shawnee. And it's just this little place built around 1938, 40 or so. I think it's 1940. And note the lady hanging her clothing on the clothing of the house. I see a lot of, I think tank tops in there, sheets. I think it's mostly sheets and pillowcases and things like that, actually. And here she is bent over to the camera like that. Then she just happens to be putting up her laundry right from the side of the house all the way to here. And a pretty simple place. But you see it a few years later. Note that this is now part of this, and this is part of the expansion, and it has been extended out the front and probably out the back as well. So you're seeing a 10-year difference here between this and this. So there you go. I mean, that's just you can see the evolution of a place over time. So if you're lucky enough to have more than one picture, adds to the record. Next up. Now I include this one here. It's not an old house, but it's an unusual one. Unusual for us anyways, because over time, of course, architectural styles and tastes change. And so you're seeing this place right here. This is off of Brent Drive, right? Yeah. What was that? Sorry.
It's on Brent, I walk by it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And I kind of like this architecture too. Sometimes some people don't. This was built around 1970, I would say. And it shows, again, the architectural changes, the styles of the day. And of course, if you had some money, this is a little thing to tell people if you had some money, especially in the Italian or Polish or even German neighborhoods, you had a big lamp in the front window, the big, look at this huge thing in the center pane right there. If you're all familiar with The Christmas Story, right, that movie, there's the leg lamp. Actually, that gag in the movie is a play off of it, a common custom at the time, that if you had real money, you had a big feature in your front bay windows, and it was usually a lamp, and there it is right there in the front. And you could tell this very open garage on the side there. Note how very sleek it looks, essentially the huge windows and so forth. And so that there's a lot in here that you can see. Next. Now this is the Creekside Rest, or the Creekside Inn, if you will. Oh, not an inn, but a Creekside restaurant, I should say. This was a little place, long, thin structure stuck in between Niagara Falls Boulevard and Sawyer Creek, actually. This is the northern side. You can see the houses on the other side of Eric Road further down. You can see another supply truck freshly dropping off their supplies. Most of these were taken in the morning, so you got your supply trucks coming in and doing their work earlier in the day. So that's probably why you see a lot of trucks around. Note the different signs. Note the Pepsi Cola sign up here and other different ads on the side of the building. I think that's a hot dog in there. Now, even in a place like this, is a couple little stories. In the men's room, there used to be not a toilet, and I guess they probably had a toilet in there, but the men's urinal is actually one long bathtub. I mean, essentially, and they just went in there. The one guy said that it was on a platform, so you had to get up onto it. He tells me, I always felt like I had to do a performance every time I did that. The same thing was in the Janix restaurant too. There was another odd thing like that. And again, the place was so thin that the pool table on this side of the building probably, people had to kind of crowd around it. People remember going around it and literally sticking the pole and the hand, the elbow out the window just to get the shot. And then to do that all the time, it was that small. There was one guy who would come in across the boulevard and, one of those things, is there, is there anybody here? And everyone said, no, no, just to, he would hide from his wife basically. And when she would come in, they know he would go to the restroom, and when she would say, "Where's my husband? Did he scurry off to the bar again?" They'll all be like, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." Stuff like that, of course, in the Cheers kind of way. Next up. Now over here is a long gone structure also, but this is at the corner of Church Road and Maple Street, Maple Road. And right there where the current town hall sits today, actually the entrance to it on the far east side, or yeah, far east side of it, if that house is still there, you'd be going right through it, because that's where the Mole farm was. And this is the Mole house, family house. And there used to be a couple of barns and whatever out that way more, but those had actually been destroyed in a tornado of all things. Tornadoes are kind of rare over here, but at one point, like 50 or so plus years ago, a tornado came through and blew through it. And as my colleague Don Shorter would say, he saw it from the back window. He actually didn't go to shelter at first. He actually saw it from his back window of his family's house further down that way. And he says the chickens were everywhere and debris and whatever. It was just nuts. And this house dated back to like the 1870s or so, and was of course torn down by 1971 or so for the new town hall. On the porch here for the longest time was actually a church pew that came from Trinity Church, which is no longer around in Burkholz, but it was one of the old seats for it, and it was on the front porch as a kind of seat for a long time. Next up. Now again, architectural styles change. Here is one of a couple, I think, A-frame houses. And these were pretty popular in the 1960s, a kind of minimalist style. And, they were not the best with regards to airflow, because the heat would go straight to the top and it hard to circulate the air. But otherwise, it's a cute little cozy place. And actually, this used to be a little business at first, but it became a house anyways, and a little triangle garage was put next to it. And it's still there today off of Niagara Falls Boulevard. Next. Another gone structure. This was off of River Road, probably belonging to the Milliman family. The Millimans were near the Williams family, they themselves owning large amounts of land in that part of the town, but also in the town of Niagara and what's now LaSalle, and also the city of Niagara Falls and LaSalle. This is a house that might have stood for maybe just a few more years before it was gone. And this is a case that I put in here of a place that you're lucky to get if it's still there. And you can tell it's very, very overgrown. No one had been living in it for a long time. The driveway is still rudimentary. Nothing else has been done to it. So obviously people weren't going to be in there much longer, I guess, or it wasn't going to be used again. Next. Now this is one of our oldest buildings in town. This is off of Mapleton Road and right further back. This house is probably, if it's not 200 years old this year, it is next year. And actually, the core of it, or at least the whole of it, dates back to that time. It was built by the McNitt family, and they came out this way as land speculators. And one of them was, at least one of them was a War of 1812 veteran, and our second supervisor, Wheatfield eventually. His name is Benjamin Franklin McNitt. No relation to Benjamin Franklin, I don't think. But a lot of people were named after the founding fathers, of course, in those years. So he was called that. And he likely served on the East Coast before moving inland when there was a lot of land available and people either couldn't or wouldn't return. So he and others came and did their thing out this way. And they also farmed and whatever else. Incidentally, in 1836, when the town of Wheatfield was founded, we were the last community actually to be founded in Niagara County. That was the year that the last parcel of the Holland Land Company was sold. The Holland Land Company was still around technically in Batavia, New York, and we're still selling off properties right until that last year, the very year of our founding. And then they closed the books, and that was the end of that. The end of an era, but the beginning of another for us. Next up. Now here's another happenstance picture. This shows, three kids that just were playing or hanging out, and their father is here and so forth. And this is a new home back then. This is probably taken, I think, about 1965, 68, something like that. Correct me for, at home, because I know that one of you might be watching it. And there's a story that came with this. Of course, like other posts on the Facebook history thing, one of the kids actually commented and saw this, and we're really delighted to see it. And he leaves a comment behind. Next. This is what the house looks like today. Let's say you saw they were standing right there, and the driveway wasn't done yet, but of course it's all good. Norm Mutek is one of those kids. My childhood home. The next was, the year was 1975, I should say then. Yeah, 1975. And that's my sister Cindy and next door neighbors and friends, Gina Stansby Casale and Maria Stansby in front, and my dad Norm Utek Sr. and our dog Woof. Next one. Now, this is a house right on Ward Road and Pierce, and another family lives in there today. They've done a great job in rebuilding and maintaining it. And this also dates back very, very far back. How far back? Well, Debbie certainly knew. She says, this was my grandparents' house until 1979 when my grandmother passed away. It had many unique features from days gone by. As you walked into the kitchen, I remember a hand pump that drew water for the house. It had a wood stove that my grandma used to cook on. Over in the corner, I recall a modern stove, but it was seldom used. I knew the right amount of coal or wood to use to make meals. You had to coordinate everything even more back then because you didn't have anything automatic like we have now. The kitchen was a square room that did not resemble a modern kitchen. No cupboards, and along the wall were hooks for clothing and coats. Off the back, there was a root cellar with a dirt floor where they kept vegetables. It was a few feet down, unlike a modern basement. Off the dining room, there was a small room where they kept dry goods on shelves on one side, silverware, dishes, and cooking vessels. On the other side of this was a small, modern, to them, bathroom with almost no room to move in. The living room had a small oil heater that heated the downstairs bedroom, dining room, and living room. It had a very, that's her emphasis, by the way, in capitals, very steep stairway leading to a small 2-room upstairs that even my feet at a young age had to climb sideways. And it was pretty much unfinished with storage in the front and an old iron bed in the other area. I think of that house often, how things were built versus modern units now. And how, you know, we would think, well, that seems awfully rudimentary. But you know what? We're talking about a more practical time. We're talking about a more thriftier time, essentially. A lot of these people remembered things like the Great Depression and so forth. You had to make as much as you can out of what you had. And in the older German custom, if you will, and customs of many other people back then, you used as much of what you had until you really couldn't use it anymore. And then stuff was put out into things like the privy area for people like my friend and colleague, Mr. Jablonski, to eventually dig up later on. That's a fascinating little business he's got there. And, yeah. Next up. Now, right here next to Dubois, on that same corner of Ward and Niagara Falls Boulevard, we have 2 other things that's not here anymore, and these were all over the place. You know, again, garages, service stations, a little store, little food thing right over here. All that is gone now as well. But it's just to kind of show you, again, the variety of things that were in that corner. Note the assessor's notation marks. Sometimes when a lot happened to have a lot of stuff on there, you had to go, okay, this is this is that, just so you know, to really break it down, because this stuff can be confusing. Note also the sign way over here saying Bell Aircraft. It wasn't aerospace just yet. It was Bell Aircraft and something relating to it. It was a very, very busy boulevard at that time in particular. I mean, Amazon is about to go into that general area, but we already had that experience actually with the Bell plant and Carborundum, and thousands of people working there, many more than what Amazon's going to bring even. So it was a very different time, and so they had a real presence back then too. Next. Now this is a farm area that's also gone. This was actually off of Niagara Falls Boulevard and Nash Road there on the northwest side. This is all overgrown now, but back then this was a whole working farm. It burned down in 1986 or so. Our current highway superintendent, actually, when he was a volunteer, young volunteer fireman at the time, he said we couldn't take the truck over the bridge. It was just not capable of holding. Our vehicle would thought it could probably fall through. So we had to keep it out there and drag the fire hoses across to this lot to try to deal with it. Of course, it was such a cumbersome process in part that probably finished it. So it was never, we couldn't do anything with it. So they probably tore what was left down. Next. Now here we have the first St. Johnsburg Fire Hall, as it was a fire hall at that time. There was a whole big open space here at the top. There was a couple of ladies who commented that when they were children, they actually had twirling classes up there with their batons and other different sessions like that up there. It was a community center as well as a fire hall, as many fire halls were, along with the churches and so forth. Note the alarm system at the very top here, which sounded much like the one in Burkholz does yet today. Here we have the second St. John's Church. Now, this is an odd picture because, as I said, Kroll's Tavern was so far to the corner of the road that you could see clear past the back of it when viewed from the boulevard like this. So by virtue of this oddity, we can see the church. Now, churches were not taxable, so they weren't photographed. But if you could get one in the background, that's cool. Next. Now, this is the tax assessment card for one of our more famous places, what would be known to a lot of people as Janek's Steakhouse. It is now Solidays, or was Solidays, unfortunately closed up. And there have been several different names there over the years, but this big place has had a lot of character, a lot of owners, a lot of great memories there over the years. This was on Niagara Falls Boulevard and Ward Road on the northeast corner, and it's still there today, or at least from about here to here of the older building dating back to the 1880s. That is still there, but the rest has been, of course, completely rebuilt several years ago. Way back here is the only picture I have so far of a house that actually used to be on the lot further back and where the volleyball courts are now, basically about in that area. It blew up actually in the late 70s, killing a dog and a cat, but not the people. They were not there at the time. The Janeks lived in that place, and they maintained the restaurant from there, but I understand they lost the home on that occasion. Next up. Okay, so this is just real quick on that same building. This was originally Molars, and this was a general store and the stables and inn. Now, back then, you had way stations as well as inns and so forth for farmers on the way to market with cartloads of goods and other items going down here. Elmer Moshe, the late Elmer Moshe, he was 102 or 104, about that age when he died. He was one of the very last people, if not the last person to remember being in those wooden carts and actually taking more than a day to come down from the different farms that they were invested in to go to markets in the Tonawondas, even in northern Buffalo, and they had to rest in or exchange horses in some cases, right? And so here we see two of the horses from the stables further back, rooms for the inn, probably an office up in there. Note the early gas tank and also the watering trough there. And we also see the general store on the side there. This is where people would dine later on when it was made into a restaurant and so forth. But back then, that's what it was. This is an even older picture, actually, showing a full-blown porch on the side of it there, and members of the Moeller family and others right there. This was taken about 1900, actually. Note the bicycles, all of that. So it's been undergoing a lot of change over the years, and these are the different iterations of what it was over the years, but I won't go through all of that now. Next up. Now here is a whole list. Remember when I said before that it wasn't just the buildings and the properties that were tabulated. If you were a business, you also included what was in the place. So, what was inside of a restaurant at that time was all itemized out and put down. For us historians and researchers, it offers a very interesting snapshot again of what constituted a restaurant back then in general. And certain things are not in restaurants now, like the building used to have 75 ashtrays. There was, we have, I think it's, let's see, one jukebox, probably from Wurlitzer down the way, of course. We also have, let's see, would be the one that's, sorry. And let's see, what else do we have in here? Plywood tabletops. We have at least 12 sugar dispensers, 30 salt and pepper shakers, 1 portable beer tap and cooler, 1 pool table, 1 television, 2 cash registers, 8 cases of glasses. There was also 200 sets of silverware, 104 chairs, 55 tables, 4 air conditioners, 3 fire extinguishers, that sort of thing, that made up that. And also on here somewhere is a cigarette, vending machine. I remember seeing that vending machine was still there in the early 90s when it was Janix yet. Next up. And of course, along with a lot of these cards came your basic documents and measurements as to what a place was like, especially if there was any kind of contention as to what, counted for water. Sometimes they would have a diagram kind of made up to help illustrate a particular place a little better. Next up. And finally, my place. And this was built by Alfred Bolonic. He had a masonry and contracting business there. His brother John owned a nursery on Niagara Falls Boulevard, and that's where a lot of the plants and bushes that would be here came from. John was a World War II veteran. Alfred was a Korean War Sea veteran, and because of that training, it gave him all the skills to make up his passion, which was to build out of stone and brick and so forth. He did magnificent work all over the place. I was just at a house or an estate sale down the way from me that was also built and fitted out by Fred. And as in our place, that place had one full fireplace on the first floor and a second fireplace in the basement. You had your regular living room and your sort of play living room, your private living room, right, where the guys would get together and do whatever. The pool table down there. There was another place like that I just visited too, where there was a whole shuffleboard layout on the ground. So people made up their own entertainment. They made up their own bars in many cases, and of course you want a fireplace down there for when people came over and had a good time. And we had a certain the same sort of arrangement back then. Note the car in the front here, which I believe was his wife's car, I'm told. That was the garage there and other details. But you can again tell this is a baby picture of a house newly built at the time. Next up. And of course, you live in a country town when cow delivers triplet calves in Burkholz. This is Alan Dementier, really awesome citizen of the town, a member of the very large Dementier family and its holdings, and they still have a farming capacity today. And this is this is a headline that I just love. My other favorite headline is from about what was it, 1942, I think, and the headline was "Judge spanks 42-year-old man for calling him names." And actually happened. I mean, the story says, no, really, he was taken into the judge's chambers and spanked right there. That's when you could do that sort of thing. I also want to mention one other thing before we go. This is a little segment called Meet Your Street. This was a segment, I think, in Tonawanda, one of the Tonawanda papers. And I was talking about the history of Ward Road, but I'm not going to go through the history exactly, just to point out one common complaint that I think we hear all too often, but maybe put in a different way back then when it came to wanting to improve things, even in 1878. This is from a newspaper article in that year, and it's far from flattering, right? He says, "We trust that the time is not far distant when the citizens of the town of Wheatfield will take into consideration the propriety of improving this, the most prominent and important thoroughfare in the town, except one, the River Road. During the past 2 or 3 weeks, it has been a curse to the town, and has been cursed itself by more than one who has endeavored to urge his horses through this impenetrable depths. If the labor annually expended upon it could be devoted to breaking stone, which can be procured at astonishingly low prices at wholesale, this thoroughfare would soon be in condition to defy the elements and would be one of the most beautiful in the county. Let the work be done." Hurrah.
Yeah.
Here, I don't know.
Yeah.
Nowadays, people would just put a brief comment on Facebook today and say, "Fix that."
Yeah.
I don't like it. So that's that. Thank you so much again for coming. Really.
Thank you.
These are my contacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Does anyone have any questions while we're recording?
Yeah, for those at home and for those right here, if you have anything to add or to contribute to the Town of Wheatfield Historian's Office, you may call this number, it's 716-694-6440. There'll be an option you can press to at least leave a message. A little better way to get a hold of me is to go to my Town of Wheatfield website, Higner, HIGNER.J @wheatfield.newyork.us. Also on Facebook is Town of Wheatfield, New York, Our History. It's a group page. You can also private message me there for particular requests. Any comments, paper, photo donations or loans, any ephemeral items and testimonials are always welcome for the town-wide interview, if you will. And you can submit them to the town clerk's office at Town Hall at 2800 Church Road. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everyone.
Any,
Yay.
thank you again.
Now, I know my son has gone back, I guess there's like archival photos you can look at